My name is Kendrick Chittick. I'm the president of the Trout Club. I'm finishing up a 2-year term to serve the club in that way. The Trout Club has been an associated society of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History for over 40 years. So we're very grateful for our partnership with the museum, and we pride ourselves on our ability to spread education and awareness about our fisheries here in Ohio. We also educate anglers about the necessary skills and locations that they can get out and enjoy it. And then we also work to fund science and research associated with fisheries in our region. This is a saga of Ohio's native brook trout. From many streams to one stream, from endangered to propagation to restoration. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for fishing.
So in 2009 and 2012, I'm going to sort of put up a few figures that look like this. The maroon dots represent adult fish, and the green dots represent age 0, or that year class of young fish. And you don't need to get too worked up in what the axis on the left is. Just suffice it to say it's our measure of abundance, a standardized measure of abundance of fish. So you can see that from 2009 to 2012, the young fish, the year class measure went down a little bit. The adult abundance went down a little bit, but not notably. They're still there. And during this survey period, the stream looked like this: clear water. You can see that substrate that's exposed, the gravels and the pebbles, undercut bank, intact stream banks. That was what it looked like. When we went back in 2015, this is what we went back to see. This was a picture we took that day. So we had that township had 200-year storms within a week in 2015, extremely localized flooding and heavy rain, and the landscape just couldn't buffer it. And the stream became a gully, just complete scouring. The substrate that you saw in that prior picture was gone. And, cut banks. You can see where the water was up on the different sides. Just completely changed the nature of that stream. And we saw no trout nor other fish as well, which usually we don't see fish other than maybe some daces. But it wiped out the trout. Interestingly, when we were that same day, when we were kind of up on the side of the stream and moving around, we just noticed how little leaf litter there was, and just patches of hard, compact soil in the forest. And just a little bit of digging around, we saw a bunch of these invasive earthworms. Now, I'm not an earthworm guy, I'm a fish guy, but I couldn't tell you the scientific name. But, there is an invasive Asian earthworm that's, becoming a problem in the upper Midwest. And if you see them in the forest floor, they're going to be just extremely wiggly, almost like a snake darting away from you, versus our traditional night crawler we think of, where they're kind of slow and whatever. And these guys just eat the duff layer in the forest floor like it's their job, and basically create a hard pack on the soil, on the forest floor surface that's like concrete. And you could just tell that, not only did that area get 200-year storms in a week, the riparian ability of that, the forest watershed to absorb that water just wasn't there. The water clearly just sheeted off with no absorption, and added energy to the stream. So everybody has their own view on climate change and whatnot, but I certainly contend that we are seeing a lot more frequency of these 100-year storms, which should be once every 100 years by definition. And these short, high impact amounts of rainfall, and then you have this invasive species as a second part of that story. And it's changing these vulnerable habitats like headwater streams. And brook trout were, an unfortunate byproduct of that, that met their demise at Pettibone. So Mirror Valley, this one is a stream that came out of the reintroduction as successful. And there's still a few, as of 2018, there were still a few trout in there. We're going to sample it again this August, and I suspect we're not going to find any trout, but we'll see. This is actually on the Hinckley Reservation, Cleveland Metro Parks. We work with them. You probably know Mike Durkalek, our biologist up there. He's a friend and great partner here in this work. We were aware over time that the stream had some some upstream land uses that needed addressed. But throughout the course of the reintroduction project and, the early 2010s, the stream looked like this. You still see those gravel, pebble, cobble. You see a little bit of evidence of some high energy and some bank cutting on the left there, but in generally it looks pretty intact habitat. Well, as of late, this is what this stream looks like now. Any gravel that is there is just coated in a blanket of silt. It's clear that upstream uses are creating both higher energy, higher velocity of water coming down through and eroding away and eroding that silt into the system. And this is one where, Cleveland Metro Parks has identified this and put a number of, improvement projects upstream in the watershed. And the lesson from this one is, by the time you see the streams getting degraded and you implement restoration projects in the stream still needs time to heal. And brook trout don't always have that time on their hands. They have to get a year class off every year. And at some point, those adults are going to die out. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. This figure is that same abundance figure. And the green is, like I said, or the green is the age zeros, the young. And you can pretty much see starting in 2014, basically not really registering a spawn, not registering a year class. But the maroon color, the adults, are still sort of hanging on 2013, 14, 16. And then finally, sort of the lack of reproduction caught up to it in 2018 and very few adults. So that's why I say that this year we go back. I would be surprised to see really any fish, because you're almost getting to the point where you'd have to sort of put, Harry with Sally in the same pool to have any chance of reproduction at this point in that stream. So that's kind of two case studies, one where we saw issues and restoration work occurred here at Hinckley, but, it needs time to heal and trout kind of don't have that time. And then one where I contend we saw basically the effect of climate change impacts and invasive species that decimated the other stream. Those kind of things are not things that are easily managed. You can't manage 100-year storms at a District 3 fisheries management level. You can't really almost manage the earthworm at some sort of project scale level. These are big sort of national, global type impacts that unfortunately are hurting these brook trout. So, what does it mean moving forward? We have, let me go back here. We have this picture here that shows even these 5 successful streams coming out of the project you're seeing a lot more mediums and lows as you get into 2016, 18, 19, 20. What does 21, 2, 3, 4 look like for these fish? We're aware of that. We got the brook trout committee kind of back together and was like, look, we got to do something. People are asking us, what are you doing, other than just monitoring? And I agree, like, we don't want to just monitor them into their demise. But it also isn't an easy management lever. It isn't like, well, just raise more and stock them. Okay, we did that in the reintroduction project, and now we saw that even the good streams are going downhill because of big, broad, landscape scale issues. So, we're kind of like, we need to go back to the drawing board. You can't just push repeat on the same notion. How do we look at this differently to keep fish intact that we have? And that's kind of where we're at. The first thing we realized, and I know we mentioned it even at the beginning of this talk, you mentioned how the club, maybe there's ways to partner and, fiscally or whatever with brook trout, and that's great for sure. It quickly became apparent to us and was pointed out to us that before we can ever really go out there and secure like legit size grants for, watershed wide projects, you have to have a management plan in place. You don't really even get to the competitive side of those grant discussions without a management plan or conservation plan. So similar, Lake Erie water snake had a recovery plan, very purposeful identified steps and strategies that then money could be paired with to hopefully sort of follow in a stepwise way to create your objectives. Not a shoot from the hip kind of like, what do we do now? Spotted turtle is a great example in Northeast Ohio, where lots of partners are coming together with a management plan on how do we work towards the recovery of spotted turtles. Spotted turtle is probably a great analogous example to the brook trout. And so to that end, actually, we're working with the Geauga Park District to sort of take the bones of the spotted turtle conservation plan and retool that for brook trout using that sort of structure, obviously with different content. And so that's where we're at now. We are in the process of working out what that plan would look like. The goal is, by winter of 21, have a tangible draft in hand. That's going to be essential, not just for securing the funding, but for even us staying consistent in our goals of what do we need to do. We know it has to be targeted. We know it has to be strategic. And then we figure out how to best partner with entities that align best with those objectives. So that's kind of the phase we're in now. I mean, we will keep monitoring. Obviously, that's important, but we're aware that monitoring in and of itself isn't the end, step or goal here. Does it look like transplants into other streams? Maybe in a strategic way. Does it look like a big Johnny Appleseed broadcast of stockings again? Probably not. Does it look like stream restoration activities? Definitely maybe. If they can be done in a time that allows for the stream to heal and still keep the brook trout there. We're kind of learning at the Hinckley example that one's kind of tough. So that's kind of where we're at. That's what I got on brook trout. Maybe let me pull up my thing so I can see the participants again. Do we have any questions on the brook trout situation?
So we got a couple in, Kurt.
Yeah.
But one that I'll just kind of jump to here. So as you talk about the plan going forward, and again, I know you're kind of I think you said District 3 head, right? But is there any talk about introducing these sort of like native Northeastern Ohio brook trout in other areas of Ohio that might be more conducive, like just in an effort to keep the bloodline going, as it were, say southeast West Virginia, PA area?
Yeah, so thought yes. Until now, to date anyways, our stance has been keep them in the drainages we know we have historical documentation of. It's just sort of that sort of pathway of the most conservative approach, I guess you would say, to not be a contributor to putting species outside the range. Now, that being said, I realize just putting them in Southeast Ohio at a water that drains into the Ohio River is a lot different than taking some, tilapia and putting them somewhere else that's, from half a world away. I get that. But to date, we've basically held, we need to keep those in the drainages we know they were. Would that be something that maybe gets sort of looked at as you sort of flesh out what does a conservation plan really look like, and what are the pros and cons of that? Yeah, I don't think that's out of the question to consider, and it's a valid discussion to have. Really, until now, we've basically been of the stance of we're not really moving this fish around anyways. I mean, like when we do it, let's do it with a strategy behind it. So it hasn't really become a consideration yet. But yeah, have had some various requests from folks who say, hey, I have property in, Belmont County or what have you, where, it's a headwater stream and it's super cold year round. What about trout? So are there some streams out there that might hold them? Yeah, possibly.
Awesome. Thanks for that. There was actually a couple of other follow-ups along those similar sort of lines. But it sounds like really the answer here is, primary focus on the natural areas with maybe a consideration of these other areas, down the line is a possibility.
Yeah.
We've got another one in here. So we've got a question that says, maybe diving a little bit deeper into what's hurting the populations. Is it primarily water temperatures, or what's really driving down these populations, or do we not know?
So I don't think we know. I can't say, here are my statistics, I know this is it. But sort of observing what we have seen with our survey work and the way these streams have changed, I would say the number one thing we're seeing is, stream scouring, higher energy in these systems. So, that's going to be heavier rainfalls. It's going to be landscapes that are not absorbing as much water and instead sheeting it off into the stream. It could be drainage and culvert changes upstream that is, kicking some sort of feeder into the stream at a spot. But it definitely, the streams where we're seeing these declines, you go and you can see evidence of bank erosion at high water. You can see those twigs and leaf mats that are pushed up on the bank where at one point, a big surge of water did come through. You can see where you can like slough away silt and get back down to the cobble and pebbles where that's where the brook trout would want to spawn, and it's covered with just that sheen of silt. So more so than temperature. We're seeing some places where maybe it got a little warmer if there's a pond or something, but by and large, we're really not seeing actual water temperature changes. It's still day to day to day to day, this water coming out of springs, but it's what's happening on the landscape that's adding sort of pulsed and periodic energy to the stream that really seems to be kind of blowing out that habitat.
Got it. So that we've heard a very similar story from several of our other speakers over the last year. We had a woman who came out and spoke about the Cuyahoga River watershed, and she kind of closed her presentation by saying everyone needs to have a rain garden in their yard. So I think I'm hearing the same statement coming from you. Everyone should be digging a rain garden.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. It's kind of like you feel like you can do nothing about it, but then maybe everybody can do a little something about it. But then we see those earthworms, like I was saying, at the Pettibone property, and that was just nuts as we got up in the forest and kind of walked around. I mean, the forest floor was like concrete, like rain would not absorb into it. You got stuff like that. You could do all the rain barrels you want, and you got a landscape, a watershed scale impactor like that. Yeah, it's a lot of causes at once that are kind of coming together.
Fair enough. So just one last, current question in the chat box. What can we do, right? We as the Trout Club, we as anglers, we as just interested parties who might be here, what should we be thinking about doing? How can we help, either as an organization, as an individual, along those lines? How can we help the brook trout population?
That's a great question. And that's what it seems like it should be easy. Like, well, here's how to help. And it's kind of the question that we always land on that I'm like, I'm not sure exactly. Certainly it would be things like being vocal and supportive and supporting legislation like that RAWA I mentioned. I mean, that's the kind of thing where you could have a $20 million infusion into Ohio for species of greatest concern. That's real money. Now, are there factors affecting the brook trout that's beyond a price tag? Maybe, but still, that that kind of scale is some legit funding there. So certainly being supportive of those type of conservation initiatives. Day to day, hopefully this time next year we do have a conservation plan that at least outlines some steps to do. It may be things, when I met with Steve Madewell and Terry Harmon, we kind of talked about, hey, there's an aspect of this that even if we can't make every stream naturally reproducing in sort of my ideological world of conservation, maybe there's ways that partners can kind of jump on board on more the education side, where we have them in some streams that we have to put them in occasionally just so people can see them and learn about the history, or maybe other sort of community engagement education things that clubs could jump onto for sort of the awareness of it, kind of the bald eagle of fish, if you will. So there's some aspects of that could come along. There may be, we were kind of talking about artificial propagation, and because some of the history there, Terry and the University Schools almost had an in-stream way of propagating trout. And, I kind of said, well, gosh, from a conservation standpoint, like, to me, success is here's a stream and they're just naturally doing their thing. And they were like, yes, but maybe there's also a few places where it just is what it is, that we help them along with your classes for the continuance of the species and people to see. And, maybe that's a way where partners like certain clubs maintain those little, in-stream spawning box type things. So, there could be some tangible ways. Even when George Klein and I were talking this winter, he asked, what about even just those like red boxes? You build a square out of wood and put it with gravel just so the fish have a substrate to spawn in. Could that be something that may or may not move the needle, but it's very doable by a group of volunteers on a Saturday, and maybe it adds something to the population. So I think it's a range from supporting those big federal level conservation initiatives that, legislatively that could come down, as well as maybe we do some small scale habitat stuff that, if nothing else, raises awareness among those who help out on a project, and then maybe does, put some band-aids on populations. So it's not a terribly fulfilling answer, I guess, but I'm not at the point where I say, hey, we have this project. If we only had $5,000, we do this project, but we don't. That's kind of not where brook trout are right now, with those sort of easy, biteable projects ready to, move dirt.
Sure. Makes sense. And, good to hear that there's, perhaps some stuff like that maybe on the horizon, but, I've gotten notes from Kendrick. I've gotten notes from Jerry. I mean, we as a Trout Club are here to help in these sort of things. So we want to be involved in this, and will in whatever capacity we can. So, keep us in mind as projects do come up, and, we will do what we can to get the word out about this. Like I said, like Jerry said at the outset, this will go on our YouTube channel this week. So hopefully other people can see it and hear the brook trout story, and just, we can help hopefully further the education aspect of it. But
yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, I do realize and acknowledge your support and desire for support. When I talk to, other groups or even internally, kind of keeping the brook trout on our internal radar, I regularly mention the museum's Trout Club and sort of the interest of support, and sort of, at the ready for support that you guys have articulated. So it's not falling on deaf ears. Unfortunately, I don't want to come for an ask if I don't have a good use for the ask yet, so hopefully we get to that point. But I appreciate that support for sure. Sometimes you sit back in frustration, feel like this whole brook trout in the shadows of Cleveland is like a square peg round hole thing, because it's just such a pristine fish and such an impacted landscape. But yeah, I'm not giving up, but it's definitely this one's a bit of a head scratcher to how you're going to keep it going intact. So
sure.
Kurt, I do think the plan is helpful from a conservation perspective too. I mean, I know through some of my work that when we have plans for, the Massasauga rattlesnake at the Land Conservancy, or other species, you mentioned the spotted turtle and the cameras, all that. I mean, that makes a big difference for funders as well. So, it just makes those projects that have the headwater streams, that have the habitat, it makes them way more competitive if there's a larger plan with all those partners that you mentioned before, between the NGOs, the clubs, and the state. So I have seen some of those be effective if they're done the right way.
Yeah,
so that's good.
Yeah, it's not a satisfying answer when you tell somebody, well, what are you going to do? Well, we're gonna sit there and write a plan, but it's needed, I think.
Yeah, for the nuts and bolts of how that works, it is needed. Yep.
Well, we just got another question come in through the chat box. Somebody's actually asking, is there anything that can be done about those invasive worms?
So I don't know. If you could find an expert on them, let me know, because I will sit in on the talk as well to learn. I mean, I will say, I know Paul Pierre over at Jaga Park District, and I think also in Holden, they've done some work. Now, I don't know if it was anything beyond just sort of a survey, what's the extent and the impact, or, they also have some sort of solutions or mechanisms of control. But I know both of those entities do have them on their radar as, a thing, a concern. But yeah, I tell you, I don't know much about them beyond what I mentioned about their impacts on the soil.
Got it.
And I don't
keep
hear
that
it
away.
much. I
We'll
don't even
do
hear it
something.
much in circles. So people aren't talking about it much, but yeah, squirrel that one away as a possibility.
Well, I'll open it up to anyone else who's on the call. Are there any final questions before we close it out today?
Kurt, this is George Klein.
Yeah.
Yeah, would there not be a reason to take a few of these brook trout and put them into some type of hatchery and hold them there until we don't wake up someday and find out that all the streams have been wiped out?
So you could, I mean, I guess like any of this, I don't want to be black and white and say, no way. You'd have the very real pressures of, well, why are we holding these and keeping them healthy? And, what's the end goal here? I guess it'd be essentially like a living repository of the genetic material, if you will. You'd have some number issues too, right? Like, how many do you really need to hold so you don't have such an insane genetic bottleneck that you're not really even effectively holding the genetic diversity the population has. So I think maybe just where rubber meets the road, it hasn't elevated to sort of a practical task to actually say we're going to put dollars and man hours at this. I would think you'd probably be grabbing a pretty hefty number of fish if you really try to explore the kind of genetic diversity you'd want to save there. And then do you swap them out, or do you just keep crossbreeding those? There'll be a lot of thoughts there. I mean, you'd be creating a hatchery strain, just like we have hatchery strains now that we know pretty much all of our identified brook trout hatchery strains are genetically constricted compared to wild populations. And so does that really get you any further ahead than just saying, we know we have hatchery brook trout strains that we could buy? I mean, the uniqueness of the Ohio strain is its diversity and sort of genetic differences among its nearest neighbors. Otherwise, let's not bother calling it really Ohio native brook trout and just say, well, if they go by the wayside, we go and grab some other brook trout. So those are, I guess, some initial thoughts that kind of come to my mind. It'd be some of those genetic concerns and sort of what's the end goal there. Because, anybody who runs a hatchery will tell you you're sort of 1 24-hour period away from some, disease risks that shuts them down. So, I mean, I know there's been talk even about like cryogenically freezing some material just to keep the genome, if you will. And maybe there's a place for that, if it's a sort of a reasonable cost, put this in our back pocket. Maybe it shouldn't be completely off the table, but no, to this point now, we haven't realistically considered holding live fish for a what if situation. I think all of those type ideas are I think as this plan unfolds, one of the exercises I've heard that's very important in these conservation plans is you just throw every dart you have at the board at one point in time anyways. So you've sort of thought, thought beyond maybe like the narrow views I have or the narrow views Dirkolek or Papier have, and you just throw ideas out there. And so, yeah, hearing things like that, even though I have sort of my rational why this might not work right now, are really good ideas to make sure like we think big and outside the box. So to that side, I certainly appreciate that comment.
Hello and welcome to a conversation with noted educator, fishery biologist, and conservationist Terry Harmon. Terry is a legend amongst fishing enthusiasts, conservationists, and educators in our region for his pioneering work at University School fish propagation and the conservation of native brook trout, projects that drew the attention of and support of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History Trout Club. The Trout Club itself was founded in 1978 with a mission to promote cold water fisheries and habitats, conservation, and stream ecology. The Trout Club also sponsors classes, activities, and events related to fly fishing and outings to a variety of prime angling locations throughout the year. Today, we want Terry to tell his unique story of a life with trout.
Thank you. At the start, I want to thank the Trout Club of the museum and the museum itself for hosting what I hope will be a presentation that impresses people about what we can do about preserving our vanishing wildlife in terms of fish in this case. You wanted to talk about the native trout.
Right. So, I mean, there's a great story here about
Yes,
a
it
native
is.
strain
It's
of
a
brook trout.
serendipity story.
So let's hear about that.
I was just finishing up a class in the biology class at the school. Scott Schubert shows up. Yeah.
1984.
1984. I have trouble with the 70s and the 80s. Anyway, I knew from, like you did, that Kirtland and Garlick and Ackley, actually Ackley had a fish farm, the first fish farm in North America. So there was a well-known, at least in the history, we had trout, and I knew from my father, Furnace Run and Conneaut. Somebody came to the door and said, there's a guy on a motorcycle down on the loading dock area, wants to talk to you. Oh, I don't know, a motorcycle. So I went down, and there was a stranger, young guy, nice guy, introduced himself as Scott Schubert. I'm from Chardon area. And, oh, good. He said, I understand you work with trout. I said, I do. And he said, well, I do too. I have a pond in my backyard, and I have trout. They're kind of pets. So that's what it was. He came for some fish food. I said, oh, you have trout. I said, rainbow trout? Because, you know, that's what most people think of because that's what they're allowed to see. Oh, no, brook trout, native trout. And he used the word native. I said, this guy knows something. So come in. And we talked. He said, I don't know what the big brouhaha is. They're all over the place out where I live. What? I said, where do you live? He said, well, I'm off of Mulberry Road in Geauga County. And there's a stream there that's one of the branches of the Chagrin. So I said, I'll give you all the feed you want if you show me where you get them. Okay, come on. School was over. I followed him on the bike, went to his house, saw his pond. Indeed, he had these beautiful brook trout. So then we went down into the creek where he got the fish to start the pond. And they were all over the place. You know, all sizes. And they most of them small. I was speechless. He said, well, this isn't the only stream. There's other streams too. Show me. So this led to this odyssey. So he said, well, there's a land office here. There's a guy there. So I went and met him. And I just introduced myself and told him what I was interested in. Oh, go study this. Sure, come study the stream. Do whatever you want. Let me know what you find. That's what started. This little stream, which was still pristine, the lower part was total forest, watershed protected. It was a natural to aim for restoration or maintenance. Meanwhile, remember, at this time, Sulphur Springs we're running the Sulphur Springs Trout Project with the Clone Group 1.
With Clone Group from Quebec, your
Right.
Quebec stock, right?
So at this time, a student with his civic duty wrote the state. Unbeknownst to me, he wrote the Division of Wildlife, and his name was James Odeski. And loved the guy. He was just on fire with this, and he wanted to know other people that did things with this. He wrote this really urgent letter, you know, that, hey, we found these fish that are in the historical literature, and they're hanging on by their toenails. Will you join with us to somehow expand this and save these fish? Wow, you know, he showed me the letter. I said, okay, good, let's see what they say. Well, a letter came back, the first letter came back, and it complimented him and University School for their conservation concerns. But they in researching their records, realized that in the 1880s and so forth, there was a lot of importation of salmon and trout around the country from places where they were native to where they were not native. And they said that these brook trout were no doubt from Michigan or Cortland, New York. Okay, that's what you think. So we had not had any discussion of what became known as genetic fingerprinting. So James, being the good Samaritan he is for this whole project, finds this guy through the literature who's up at Guelph, Ontario, who's probably the world expert on salmon and trout genetics. And he was doing a survey of all the different varieties of brook trout across the country. And James called him and he said, "Ohio, I forgot Ohio. You might, yes, right, you're on Lake Erie. You must have, we have them in the Grand River of Ontario, which is off by Long Point on the North Shore. Yeah. They're in there. And they, we have them up to the headwaters, which then jumps into the Algonquin Park watersheds. So Dansman said, "Can you get some of these fish?" So we get back to you. We went to Don Tincher at the land office at not the state of Ohio, and he said, "Sure, you could do that." So with brook trout.
And were you doing about trying to propagate the native strain in your hatchery at this point?
No, not then.
Not then. Okay.
But so the state went along with, we'll answer. Subsequent communication led to them agreeing to net a sample from the creek and send them to Dansman. We took them to Dansman. So I remember going over there with one of their biologists named Vince LeConte, who was a friendly guy, but he certainly didn't set policy for the Division of Wildlife. But he worked with us to catch these fish. It was nothing to take a seine in that creek and we took about 18 to 20 trout of different sizes, and they were gorgeous fish. Dansman told us how to do it. He said, just put ice in a big ice chest and throw them in whole, and then come up. It's only 5 hours. So you drive to Buffalo, you go up the Queens Highway up to Hamilton, and then it's just about an hour north of there. And he said, "Come up, you bring your students, we'll put them up for the weekend. They can check the college, we can stay at a dorm." He said, "I want these fish, and we'll show you how we do genetic fingerprinting." So, wow, this is great. And we got a bus driver. I think we had 12 kids, 15 kids. One wanted to see this genetics lab. And up we go, and he is ecstatic. He's a very tall man, very gracious. Takes us right away into the lab, bring the fish in, and he said, we'll work on these right now. We'll get our first sample, and then tomorrow we'll show you the sequences. So we were hosted that night at the dorm. We had food. Next morning, breakfast, we come over, and just about the whole day, we went through this lab, and different researchers were showing us different things. It was totally new to us, it was totally new to most people then. So Dansman's idea was, he was interested in, with a geologist, on how these trout could trace the post-glacial invasion of watersheds as they move north, as the ice retreats. So we left the fish with it, and he said, I'll call you. I won't write you. We'll call you as soon as we get a determination. So what is a determination? Well, they have unique alleles in their genetic makeup, and enough statistically significant enough different alleles that it could set them off as a separate either subspecies or population at least. So the call came to the school, where's James? I want to talk to James. You do have a fish, a unique fish. And it turns out he's not unique just to Ohio. He's unique to a corridor. And that's the whole interesting thing. He said the refuge was probably West Virginia. Down there, that clone group is in West Virginia. And then he said, what's the most logical pathway is likely, look at the map. We got the Ohio River and the Kanawha rivers. Those are big rivers. Picture them in post-glacial time. God, the water that must have been. Now, you have the, at Marietta, you have the, what's the?
Muskingum?
The Tuscarora is north of that, goes into it.
Is that Muskingum?
Muskingum.
Yeah.
So then up Muskingum, up Tuscarora, and then when you get to the Akron Summit Lakes, begins the watersheds into the north to Lake Erie. So his premise is the most likely it'd be lake. The Chicago Valley was a lake at the high stage with the Maumee stage, right? And guess what comes in as a major stream from the east? Tinker's Creek. And Tinker's Creek starts at comes out of Aurora Lake. And of course, in those days, who knows how big they were. And then Aurora Lake begins the south branch of the Chagrin River.
Wow.
So they're into the Chagrin, and then they're into Lake Erie, and then through one route, and then into the streams all through the Lake Erie Basin and up through. So, you know, he does find them in several places. I think he said that they are in rivers north to the park, Algonquin.
Algonquin, okay. So this
And
is the same strains you then would find in southern Ontario.
Yeah.
North of
Right.
Lake Erie. Yeah.
And this dovetails with a most recent report on post-glacial refuges for these fish. He mentions that the Ohio fish is not unique to Ohio. It can't be. I mean, it got here from somewhere else.
Right.
So,
But it wasn't put here.
You know, it wasn't put here.
Right, that
It was put here by itself.
it confirmed that it was in fact a native
Right.
strain. Yeah.
So once that got established, that this was a unique fish, the Division of Wildlife became very interested. And then came the Museum of Natural History's dinner meeting with.
So let's just talk about that, because this is now where the museum's Trout Club, and the Trout Club being composed of folks who are enthusiasts for cold water streams and fisheries and fellowship and all the rest of it. But they obviously were very interested in what you had been doing with brook trout, and I'm sure very interested in the Sulphur Springs thing. But now this is sort of a game changer where we now have a native fish, a threatened gene pool.
Exactly. We found a place that was a neutral, perfect place to raise these fish artificially at a private property in Wade Hill. The estate had been built in the 1890s, and they had a spring house, a beautiful stone spring house, a quarter the size of this room, and lined with stone, and 3 sources of water coming in, plus springs coming out of the bank all along, falling into the East Branch. And on the end of the edge of the property, they built a small pond like we had at Madison, same thing. And they had formalized this as a water garden. Water came out of the spring house through a rock bordered channel into a pool that looked like a swimming pool. It had steps down into it, but it was ice water. I don't know who could swim in it. The outlet was a standpipe that then led to the pond, and the pond then, which was dammed by a concrete barrier, was badly eroding, bad site. It was right on the precipice of this cliff leading to the East Branch, water cascading down the cliff. We built a hatchery for the native brook trout.
So this is in what year? So the brook trout were discovered in '84. So what year are you now?
We're 80, about 87.
Okay, and the Division of Wildlife is supportive of your effort?
Right. That was why we did it. Now we had no argument. They didn't like the fact that we had a hatchery at our school where we had been working with Quebec trout.
Right.
And I said, there's no problem with separating them. You know, we in our hatcheries, you know, fish get mixed. And okay, so we pursued this, but it gave us another project. Now, this was 15 minutes from school. Now, this is another, again, we had time. We built a hatchery that used this water from the water ram pipe as a source, and it turned out beautiful. We had 2 tiers of hatchery troughs. A building, it was 14 by 8. It was right on the hillside. It looked like a, it had a sloped roof, and it was really nice. We worked hard. We put windows in it, and the pipe came in to the side of the building, and then it was dispersed through 2 gate valves for each trough, and the water then went out to the end of the trough, went down a drain to a common drain, and then out to the brook. So then that necessitated getting a broodstock. And the largest trout that were in those creeks are like that. So again, a division representative went with us. I think we came up with something like 80 small fish.
So the division representative is with you, but you guys have built the
Right.
hatchery. You guys are actually collecting the fish.
Right.
You're really putting the whole thing together.
Yeah, we financed the whole thing.
Got it.
But you know, we're trying to build this relationship now. Things are going okay. By 2 years later, and kids would go there and feed. Watercress lines the bank of the creek coming into this pond. You know, you could have a dinner of watercress taken. It was just a most beautiful place, and the hatchery worked great. The water was flowing, ready for eggs. We don't have eggs yet. So the pond, which probably had been built around the 1890s too, was so filled in with leaves. You go in there with waders, and I mean, you just sank in it. There was a deep area, maybe 7-8 feet. It was such cold water, it didn't matter if it was deep. Trees shaded it, it was safe. The doctor had told us that in the past he had had rainbow trout in there, but poachers would come all the time. He said, I can't keep fish here. So what are we gonna do? You know, we're not gonna post a sentry on the place. So the word, he thought, because there were no more fish in there for several years, that the word would be among these poachers. It's not worth going there. So we put these 80-some brook trout in there, and 2 years later, they were big. They really grew. They exploded. It was like the word was, oh, they're genetically stuck at this side. No, they sprung out just like brook trout everywhere up in Labrador. They got big. We fed them. The water was perfect. So I guess in 88, this fall, you could tell they were nosing up into the watercress creek. You know when they're interested in spawning.
That's fine, yeah.
So we went in there with a seine, and oh my God, how are we going to do this? It's like yesterday with rocks, now it's with mud. It's a silt. Well, we got a ton of them up to the dam. And we're going along the side, another man on the other side, way over, and we get the net up there, perch it right next to the concrete wall, and the state was there, the state guy, and we were just overwhelmed by these beautiful fish. And we got a lot of eggs from them right away, right there at the dam, standing in water this deep, stripping fish. Kids are there. And then our first eggs, you'd imagine, go into the screens on this hatchery on the property. Oh, everybody's happy. And I got one last word. In all the years I've done this at US, although we had lots of kids in the program, it's always 1 or 2 in each of these groups that goes and stands out.
Hello, my name's Steve Madewell, and we'd like to share a few closing comments for our video production today. I became aware of Ohio brook trout in the mid-'70s when I was attending college at Miami University. And some 10 years later, when I moved to northeastern Ohio, I met many of the individuals who were directly involved with their conservation and their management and monitoring over the years.
Ohio's indigenous brook trout are clearly in jeopardy as the trout populations in the stock streams continue to decline, and there is no comprehensive protection of springbrook. The Ohio fish are barely hanging on, with a small group still surviving from the original population. Fortunately, there are some efforts underway that may provide hope. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources is preparing a brook trout restoration plan that will outline future efforts. The question remains, will this be enough? Over 30 years ago, the Trout Club elected to support Terry Harmon and his aquatic education efforts at the university school. The Trout Club recognized the unique nature of his work and the value of providing hands-on experiences for his students. Through his decades of work, Harmon has proven his ability to successfully raise brook trout and was instrumental in confirming the unique genetic features of the native fish. But perhaps more important, he also has developed and refined several different approaches for in-stream natural reproduction of brook trout that have proven successful in Ohio streams. These have allowed brook trout spawning to succeed in streams with marginal habitat. While executed on a small scale, these labor-intensive techniques may be the best hope for the continued existence of native stream Ohio brook trout. It is the hope of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History Trout Club that the collaborative project of brook trout restoration be revitalized, including not only all of those previously mentioned, but also expanding to include additional research and academic institutions as well as conservation organizations. We have the knowledge, we have the skill, we can develop the resources, but the question remains, do we have the will to preserve this piece of Ohio's natural heritage?